Welcome everyone to Belgrade in Serbia, where a very interesting classical match is taking place between Ian Nepomniachtchi and Hans Niemann. They are playing here a tournament with each other, just 8 games of classical chess with a time control of 60 minutes plus 30 seconds, and each day they would play 2 games. This is the first game that they are playing, and the event is very interesting with both of them being great players. Hans in good form after winning the Warsaw GCT, and Nepo, of course, the winner of candidates, two-time winner of candidates. He opens the game with pawn to e4. Hans plays pawn to e5, and knight comes out to f3. We have knight to c6. The Ruy Lopez most likely is going to happen. Yes, bishop to b5. And let's see how Hans reacts here. He goes knight f6. He goes for the Berlin. Usually these days everyone's going for the anti-Berlin, but Nepo goes for the main line with castles. And now knight takes e4. And rook e1 is getting like the major chunk of the limelight, but d4. Nepo is going for the endgame. The Berlin endgame, which has been quite rare these days because it feels like black has found ways to equalize, but Nepo has kind of felt that Hans would not be so well prepared here, which is very interesting. Takes with the pawn, and we are going to see the Berlin endgame now. This is going to be very exciting. Knight f5, takes, queen takes d8, king takes on d8, and knight comes out to c3. Hans plays his king to e8. There are many different ways to play in this position. King e8 is one of them. And Jan plays bishop f4. Now, for all those who have never played the Berlin in their life, white has a better structure, but black has the bishop pair. And usually, white is trying to trade as many pieces as possible so as to go into an endgame where his better structure will count. But on the other hand, black's pieces are quite well positioned, like the bishop could come here, the knight is on f5, and as you can see, it's not so easy for white to make progress. Knight to g5 is going after this bishop, and usually you don't want to lose that bishop. Knight to d4 played. Defending here, but also attacking the c2 pawn. He goes knight to e6. And now you can take back with the knight. Yes, he takes back, knight takes e6. And somewhere you can feel that Nepo is happy with this exchange. He goes bishop e3. His idea would be to push the f pawn down the board. Rook comes to d8, getting the rook into the center. And Jan goes f4. A good idea now is to play f5. But he goes knight d4, which is perhaps not the best. f5, you can be a bit afraid of this, but it's actually no problems. You can later get your king up to f7, and black is doing okay. But knight d4 takes, rook takes, and this is getting into kind of a dream scenario for white. King f2, you're coming in with your king up, you have a good structure, and these are the kinds of positions you don't want to be playing with black in the Berlin. c3 played by Nepo. He's a dangerous opponent in such positions. Hans would definitely be feeling it. Rook d5. And now the rook comes into the center, offering a trade. The king comes to d7. And taking on d5 is not great because it straightens out the structure. So he pushes d4, c4, asking the rook what to do. Rook takes rook. Rook takes rook. and king e6 brings the king into the center. Will Hans be able to hold this? King f3. Maybe he goes rook h8 and rook d8 and goes into that endgame. That's possible. First goes g6 and presses the clock there. Nepo brings his knight back to g3. Maybe he wants to bring his king up and push f5. The rook goes back to h8 and knight to e2 with the plan of playing knight d4 check and f5. Finally, Hans gets that move in. Either Nepo takes en passant and activates the bishop, or he goes knight d4 check. When now after king f7, it may not be so easy to make progress. Knight b3. One of the plans could be to enter in. So king e6 blocks it. And rook d3. What can Hans do? I think c5 could be an idea and then play this, but you don't want to be putting pawns on the same color as the bishop, so rook b8 played. And one of the ideas could be to push b5. Yan goes a3. But now you can go c5 and later prepare b5. Hans Niemann actually finds it. Pawn to c5 played. Nepo jumps with his knight because he's now looking at the c6 square if the b pawn moves ahead. Pawn to g5 played. And pawn to g3. The idea can be to push g4, h4. He pushes g4. And now king to g2 played. Black goes pawn to h4, expanding on the king side. And h3. I like how Hans' active play has led him to a situation where he has equalized. Takes. King takes. And pawn takes pawn. He takes with the rook. Pawn gives a check. King comes back to g2. And now rook to d8, taking the open file. This is going to be very difficult to make progress. Like if you take on b7, I have check here. Although Nepo does take the pawn, now the black rook gets active as well. So game is sharpening up now. King f3. Also time-wise, Hans has 5 minutes, while Nepo has 19 minutes. Rook check. Taking on b2 was possible, although, but he gives a check. King f2. And now rook d4. He's going after the c4 or the f4 pawns. King comes up to e3. And now rook takes c4. Seems like logical move. Takes it. Rook takes c4. And rook g6. A difficult moment actually. King d5 is the best move. And he plays it. Wow. Hans playing this actively. Rook g7. If you took here rook takes a6, then rook b4 is very good for black. So rook g7, king comes back to e6. We have knight a5 attacking the rook. And Hans can pick up the pawn on a4. He takes it. Rook takes a4 taken. And knight to c6. The knight and the rook are creating some kind of threats. Bishop h4. Good move by Hans. Black is now a pawn up. Rook h7. The bishop has to now move out from this diagonal. So rook check on e4. King goes to f3. And he goes bishop e1. That's a mistake. He should have gone king d5 and knight e7. There would be bishop e7 and he would still be equal. But instead he goes bishop e1, and now Nepo has a winning position because of knight d8 or rook c7. He takes on c7. All of a sudden, it's like the e pawn becomes strong. Everything is weak for black. Knight d8 check. King d5 defending the pawn. Check. King c4. And knight to b7. Knight d6 check is a threat. Rook comes to d4. And we have e6 here. So take, pawn takes. But bishop h4 played. And now knight check. King b3. He's running after the pawn on b2. But knight takes f5 is just a killer blow now. Ian Nepomniachtchi can simply take the pawn. Knight takes f5 and win because of take, bishop d8 and knight to d6. King here. It's a difficult calculation, but it is winning this position. Don't make a queen. First take a pawn and then you will win. So rook b7 check played. Rook b4 and now rook h7. So he's trying to win it in this way, keeping the rooks on the board. And Hans Niemann brings the bishop back to f6. We have rook to f7, attacking the bishop. Bishop d8. Somehow the bishop is trying to hold on to the pawn. Knight b7 is perhaps possible, attacking the bishop. And bishop h4 is trying to run away. But now knight takes a5 is hanging, takes on c5, king c4, rook f5, rook takes b2, knight e4, a4, and now king g4 played. Few moves happening very quickly. And now bishop to e7. Nepo has to play this carefully. He goes rook f7, bishop b4, e7, takes the pawn, rook takes, a3, brings the rook back, a2, f5 played. The pawn is not going anywhere and the f pawn is running down the board, f6. Rook comes to c2, f7, and now rook c8. Knight comes back to c3, a very good move, and he goes rook c7. He takes on a2, rook takes, and making a queen here. He first gives a check, king c2, and we have a position where queen versus rook is going to be played. Nepo takes the queen, makes it. Hans Niemann is losing here. He goes rook a4, king f3, and queen versus rook sometimes is tricky to win. But here somehow the king already is in the corner. King b2, he brings the king closer, king e3, rook b4, and we have king to d3. The king comes up, and let's see how Nepo finishes it off. He's so good at this. Queen c6, must have learnt it as a little kid here. After all, the Russians are very good at endgames. So king b2, queen to e5, keeping the queen at a little bit of a distance. So there are no stalemating ideas. And now queen a5, putting black in a zugzwang, and Hans Niemann resigns. Nepo scores the first blood in this event. And Hans Niemann, well, he tried to defend as well as he could, but was unable to do so. And game number 1 ends in a victory for Ian Nepomniachtchi. He tried to analyze, but Hans really is upset with himself. 7 more games to go, and this will be an exciting match to follow. Do stay tuned for our coverage. This is Sagar Shah signing off. Bye bye.